In this video we'll look at the purposes and methods of forecasting. Now this is just an overview video. It'll touch on a lot of areas that need to be amplified and studied in detail. So it really is just an indication, a signpost to what needs to be done. And many of the concepts, as I said, will need to be looked at in much more detail. But having said that, there are many videos on the course which cover these topics, and you should seek these out and make your own notes from them. So the primary use of forecasting, well, to determine if sufficient demand exists. So within business, it's important that business leaders can estimate their demand. So the CEO of a company or the marketing director, or whoever is responsible for this, will need to know what's the likely demand for the product in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term. And it's of particular interest to the CEO, to the Chief Executive Officer of the business, because that's an indication of the success or failure of the business strategy. The business strategy is to generate good market share and good sales, which will enable the business to produce the profits that will enable it to expand and innovate and be a player in the market. So it's important that they have some idea of what the demand is going to be. Of course, this will be based on marketing data, feedback from customers, contact with the market, analysis of what the competitors are doing, the trends in the market. So when we consider a list like that, it starts to flag up the difficulty and the complexity of trying to estimate demand. In fact, economists and econometricians spend a lot of time trying to work out what the demand for products is likely to be in the short term, medium term, and so on. And the models they use, the statistical models they use, are extremely sophisticated. But despite that, the overall confidence in the predictability of the models could still be quite low. So it is a very difficult thing to do. And probably the main reason for that is the fact that demand is there because customers put it there. And customers are people, and people are very complicated. People are very difficult to predict, and therefore demand is very difficult to predict. It doesn't stop business from trying to do it, it just merely suggests it is a very complicated thing to do. Of course, the businesses will want to look at their long-term capacity needs. Having got some idea of what the demand is likely to be, albeit with many qualifications and many issues that are perhaps being overlooked, deliberately overlooked, because it is far too difficult to work out. But having said all of that, the estimates may indicate the need for extra production, productive capacity, or extra storage capacity, or perhaps even less storage capacity and less production capacity. Depends on what the estimate of demand is when it's worked out. So it does indicate to management likely future scenarios, and they can start to plan and have plans ready should that eventuality arise. To determine mid-term fluctuations in demand so that short-sighted decisions are not made that hurt the company in the long run. Well, companies, when they're trying to plan, if they look far into the future, it becomes very problematic. After all, we're living in an age where there's very high rates of technological progress. There are also the issues of globalization and cheaper imports, and so there are many factors that impinge upon estimates when we look far into the future. The shorter we look into the future, the more reliable the estimates can be. But management want to develop strategic plans, and strategic plans typically will run over, say, a 5 or an 8-year period. Well, that's a very long time, given all the things that are happening currently in the economy. So they want to try to avoid short-termism, because short-termism means planning for the next 6 months, but then they have to go back and do it again. And perhaps their commitments to capital purchases for the next 6 months will perhaps be will not fit. It'll not be a good fit for future expansion after that. What's really needed is a long-term plan with long-term capital planning built into it. Not just capital planning, perhaps human resources as well. But the further we look into the future, the more complex it becomes and the more unreliable it becomes. And therefore there are issues confronting management. And I suppose this is the essence of entrepreneurship. It's the entrepreneurs who, in a sense, break through this and just make decisions. They make them perhaps with not so much information. They take a risk. And perhaps that's the nature of entrepreneurship, and that's when entrepreneurship is required, because we can't predict the future. To determine short-term fluctuations in demand for production planning, workforce scheduling and materials planning. Well, if we could work out the likely demand in the medium term, say over the next 3 years, then it would be possible to try and plan production accordingly, plan the workforce and the training for the workforce and the HRM issues that are involved, and also look at material plannings and the stores, and so it could be very embracive of nearly all the functions within the organization. The only problem is, as I've said earlier, that making the projections is highly speculative. The probability of success may be very low, and the further into the future we predict, the probability of getting it right becomes even less still. So there are issues associated with the use of forecasting, even though we would like to think we can do it, and even though we use it because perhaps it's the best we've got, there are all sorts of drawbacks in the use of business forecasting. The forecasting methods that could be used, well, could be informal, intuitive. That's the entrepreneur just forecasting. I think the market will expand next year. It's a feeling somebody's got. So they just say it. I think the market will expand next year, or I think the market will contract next year. It's informal, it's intuitive, it's a feeling someone's got. They may be right. And it may be they're drawing on experience, and they're drawing on perhaps something from history, something that happened in the past. Not that history necessarily repeats itself, but they could be basing it on something. But that's really the essence of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is dealing with the unknowable, as some economists say. The future is unknowable. We can't know the future, and that's what entrepreneurship is doing. They're looking into it. They're looking at profit potential and linking the profit potential to activities in the future and making decisions today to invest or not invest accordingly. Of course, it could be formal forecasting methods. Formal forecasting methods revolve around the use of perhaps sophisticated computer technology and software, using statistical data, and it could be very sophisticated, using many different statistical techniques. But despite the number of techniques and despite the sophistication of the systems, we still have to appreciate we're looking into the future. And the future is very difficult, if at all possible, to predict. Within the formal one we have quantitative. the use of statistics, the use of numbers, picking up quantitative data and working out averages and means and modes and correlation coefficients and regression coefficients and F statistics and T statistics and chi-squares, and it's quantitative. And because it's quantitative, it seems something more like science. It feels that it's got more substance. That's what it feels like. But it is looking into the future. So we have to pinch ourselves and remind ourselves that it is trying to predict something in the future. If you wanted to be very cynical about it, you could say it's like witchcraft. Witchcraft is looking into the future, perhaps. So it's a very complicated thing to do. But there are many sophisticated, mathematically sound techniques that can be brought to bear on data which may enable business managers and decision makers to have some reasonable idea of what is likely to happen. Perhaps just tip the probabilities in favor of prediction. It could be qualitative. Qualitative are based on feelings. It's based on estimates based on our feelings. It could be opinions. It could be based on someone's feelings about what's likely to happen. It could be just their feelings. The strength of feelings could be very crudely assessed using an attitudinal scale, perhaps a Likert scale, where we're asked to estimate the future and how likely is their estimate going to come about. Very likely is 5, quite likely is 4, perhaps is in the middle, I don't know too much, that's number 2, and 1 could be I have no idea. So we have a scale ranging from 1 to 5, and people could estimate this, and we could even add up different people's estimates and the strength of their feelings and take an average. We have to bear in mind they're still looking into the future, and it's still just somebody's estimates or a group of people's estimates, and they could all be wrong. So forecasting, well, we have formal and informal, like I said earlier. Let's just talk about the formal. We have qualitative, life cycle analysis, trying to work out where the product is in its life cycle. Has it reached its peak? Is it in decline? Is it still growing, or where is it in the life cycle? Perhaps if we could work out where it is in the life cycle, we can work out what's going to happen in the future, or it'll give us some indication. It could be attitudinal surveys, like I said, the Likert one. 0 is I don't know, and 5 is I'm absolutely certain, and we have a scale in between, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the scale in between are different strengths of certainty. Or it could be feelings towards the product, whether you like the product or dislike it. 0 is I dislike it intensely, 1 is I dislike it, 2 I'm dislike it slightly, 3 is I'm indifferent, 4 is I like it slightly, and so on. So we have a scale, an attitudinal scale. But again, we just have to be careful that we don't get too excited about the use of attitudinal scales. They are just people's opinions. Delphi method, perhaps calling in some experts and letting them sit around and talk about what's likely to happen and looking at different scenarios and trying to get their expert opinion about something. Could be historical analog, for example, looking into history. What happened the last time something similar came up? Will it happen again? Will history repeat itself? Well, you've got to be careful about this because, generally speaking, the world has changed. The circumstances in history at that time will be different to the circumstances now. expert opinion, very similar to the Delphi method, perhaps just asking some experts, just implying a consultant who perhaps will have expert opinion and who will guide the company in looking into what's likely to happen. But it is just an opinion. So it's not hard and fast. It could be all wrong. Consumer panels, asking people what they like and what they think and how they think about the future and how to think about the product and how to think about the market and what affects them, and getting their opinions. Again, it is just an opinion or a set of opinions, but it may be some indication. There might be some truth in it. Market testing, doing a sample of the market and asking a wider range of opinions, and perhaps conducting the market test more formally, perhaps looking at it in a random sense, collecting information based on random sampling. It's a little more accurate, it's more perhaps representative of the whole population, and if the whole population believes something's going to happen, they may bring it about. Their expectations of what's going to happen may actually lead to the event happening, because their behaviour will change, and perhaps that will lead to the event coming about. We also have quantitative analysis, which is under formal. And here we have time series analysis and what's known as cross-sectional analysis. Time series is just looking at data over a period of time, looking at the changes in the markets from one year on to the next, perhaps. Whereas cross-sectional data is taking a moment of time, one moment of time, and looking at different markets and different events in different markets. So cross-sectional is at a moment in time, time series is over time. So two totally different approaches. Cross-sectional at a moment in time, looking at the attitudes of customers at a moment in time. That's cross-sectional. Looking at the attitude of a customer over a long period of time, that's time series. Or even just looking at the attitude of a customer over a short period of time, that's time series. So they are different. With time series we could use regression. I say simple regression. By that I simply mean straight lines. If you're doing some very sophisticated piece of regression, you might want to use logs in the equations and do curvy linear lines. It just makes it more complicated. So we say fitting straight lines. Of course the real world does not operate by straight lines, and sometimes the people who perform these calculations don't really know which direction the data is pointing in. They're just waiting for the computer to work out the regression line, and hopefully that is the direction in which the data is moving. Depends on how the data appears. Cross-sectional, we could use econometrics. Econometrics is it's essentially regression analysis applied to economic data. It uses ordinary least squares, OLS, and it's called a BLUE system. It's an anagram. BLUE is the best linear unbiased estimate, BLUE, best linear unbiased estimate. And it tries to work out what the BLUE is. What's the best linear unbiased estimate. The models in econometrics can be extremely complex, and it is quite a difficult subject, and students of econometrics they have to know quite a lot of statistical theory and understand a lot about data analysis before they undertake such courses. We could have exponential smoothing. We could, instead of having regression, we could just look at the data and try to work out what the trend is and use some exponential smoothing. With cross-sectional, we might have something to do with data surveys and collecting data and trying to do some analysis on the data. We could also have moving averages. It's not a very sophisticated technique, but when we have a moving average, it may enable us to make some jump into the future, because the average is pointing in a particular direction, so we may be able to do that, and that would give us a trend. So trends may appear as well. So we can see there are techniques here that have been developed, but I don't want to emphasize too much about the problems associated with being able to predict the future, but we have to bear in mind that we are attempting to look into the future, and as some economists say, it's unknowable. We can't know the future, so there are difficulties. But the business community would love to know what's going to happen next, because that would give them an advantage in the market. So choosing a forecasting method, well, looking at the available data would be useful. Depends on the type of data that's available, the quantity of the data available. The more data there is, the better the chances are of getting a good prediction. There is what's known as more degrees of freedom with more data. But it depends on the availability of the data. There could be time and money limitations. Sometimes businesses can't afford a lot of sophisticated calculations and data collection to enter into the calculations. It's a very expensive process, so that may limit the choice of the forecasting method. Sometimes companies have to go for something quite simple and quite straightforward because it's cheaper. Also, depends on the accuracy that's required. Sometimes companies can do with just a rough idea what's going to happen. Sometimes they want to know, try to pin it down more and try to make an even more precise calculation that the market will increase by X% in the next year. Whereas others might think, is it going to increase, or is it going to be the same, or is it going to decline? And that's enough for them. So it depends on the accuracy needed, what sort of forecasting method would be used. And that's really the end of this video. Set out to just talk in brief about forecasting methods and some of the ones that are used. These appear in other videos on the course, but it's worth just putting them out there again and talking about them and having an overview of why it is we have forecasting methods, the types of forecasting methods we have, and what are their limitations. More specifically, emphasizing the limitation of trying to predict the future, which is the big problem that this sort of approach has. But that's all I'm going to deal with here, so I'm going to leave it at that and say thank you for watching.